My ministry context is one of advancement of what I call story-formed discipleship. And to be honest, over the last couple of years, as with many, it's the most positive way I could describe the progression of it is it's been puttering forward. I'd say that's fair. It hasn't been going backwards, but it certainly hasn't been going ahead in leaps and bounds. But God seems to be, just faithful and providing, and there's been opportunities as well as resources to be able to continue. So it's been, we're super grateful for that. Wife runs an op shop cafe called Junction, and we've in correspondence with the church that we've been a part of, we're looking to exploring what church planning looks like in there, in that space as well. And so that's some of what I bring to the table from my context. So I think in pictures, and when I had lunch at a restaurant with a friend, and so I'm just again naming the privileged position of that. A couple of months ago, he was languishing as a pastor and just sort of saying, it feels like a bushfire's gone through, and he was describing that from an intensity point of view, but also recognising the inconsistency of effect and impact that bushfire can have, where a township might be destroyed and there's a house at the end of the street that remains standing and intact, and that was an interesting picture for me, so much so I went back to my office and Googled bushfire recovery, came across a document, read it for the rest of the afternoon and started to piece some thoughts together. And just so happened in the following week, Young Life had a session, and I said, Adrian, I've been thinking about this, would that be something that's helpful? And so here we are today as another opportunity just to share some thoughts and opportunity for reflection. And I guess it is that sense of reflection I want to bring. And the other thing I'd like to say, I've already kind of mentioned the reality we come from different experiences, but I also like to just acknowledge the trauma that bushfire brings and has brought to many people. And I'm a little nervous in regards to here's a metaphor that we can look at without recognizing actually this is a significant metaphor as well. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that as we unpack this picture. So the invitation today is one of spiritual and strategic reflection, and I'm inviting you to allow yourselves to move from perhaps observing to participating. And the way that we're going to do that is I'll share my screen, so there's some slides and some pictures and some questions that I'll take you through. But the process we're going to go through is I'll talk for a bit, and then I'm going to give you like 3 or 4 minutes of just quiet reflection. That's the reason I put the chart up on the, if we want to throw that up in the chat, if people can't access that now. Yep, that chart. So this one here. And that's simply just to scribble on and to answer some questions as we go. And so there'll be 2 opportunities for silent reflection, and I'll give it just a couple of questions. And then towards the end, we'll break out into breakout rooms. And there's a couple of questions I'd love for you to discuss, and that'll be like a little bit of debriefing as to what something you engage with, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how I'd like to move forward. I want to read from Psalm 40. This is from the Voice translation. I'm just going to read verses 1 and 2 because I think it frames up what we're talking about. I waited a long time for the Eternal. He finally knelt down to hear me. He listened to my weak and whispered cry. He reached down and drew me from the deep, dark hole where I was stranded, mired in the muck and clay. With a gentle hand, he pulled me out to set me down safely on a warm rock. He held me until I was steady enough to continue the journey again. I really love that picture at the end of verse 2. The King James Version actually says, he established my goings, which is a cool way of kind of saying it. But that picture that the Voice gives of God holding us until we're steady enough to continue the journey again. I've just found the progression of verses 1 to 3 in Psalm 40 really interesting as I've been looking at this picture. Let me just share this screen and take you through what I've got. So there's that verse on that first slide there. So this particular gentleman's name is Hugh Banger. Please let me know if you can't see that. I'm hoping that's shared okay. Yep, good. This is Hugh Banger. He's a farmer in Lucendale in the southeast of South Australia. And I came across this article, and I wanted just simply to read it out and give you a bit of a picture of Hugh's experience. So Hugh, and this is me writing, so I'll just writing some, and there's a news article as well. Saying that Hugh Banger might be my hero, a farmer in the southeast of South Australia. Hugh concedes the moment has come for him to descend into his pre-prepared bunker. I realised there was no chance of it not coming to the homestead, he said. Using a garden hose to extinguish some vines that had caught alight on his house, Mr. Banger soon realised he could no longer withstand the heat. I thought the safest thing was to come here and get in the bunker. I did that for a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes, he said. And while he bunkered down, the fire raged outside. There were a few explosions in the sheds when they all caught fire, the gas bottles and a tyre, Mr. Banger said. It made me think of what it must be like in a war when people are getting shot at and they've got to stay inside, or bombs are coming down. Mr. Banger eventually heard a truck overhead and emerged from the bunker to assess the damage. Miraculously, his house had survived, but he estimated about a third of his 6,000 hectare property had been destroyed, and with that, hundreds of livestock. I don't know how many livestock we've lost yet, but it's really cruel. It's awful. So my question is, what's going through Hugh's mind down there in the bunker as the fire rages topside? His life's work, his livelihood and home under threat. Coming to the realisation that fighting the front is futile, bunkering down. I'm sure 15 or 20 minutes seems like a lifetime, feeling safe, but wondering how long to remain below the surface and what life will be like once he opens the hatch. He hears a truck. He climbs out of the bunker to survey the damage, coming to terms with a heartbreaking scene, the work ahead of him, taking stock of his own capacity to recover. What will it take? What will he need? Who else might be sharing the same experience? How long is the road ahead? I've never experienced anything like that of Hugh Banger, but I can't help but relate, hoping the coming disaster won't affect me, realising it will or has, bunkering down, wondering when to climb out. What I want to invite you to do in the next just 2 or 3 minutes is to think through the questions that are actually on the left-hand side of your chart. And if you've got it printed out, just to scribble on it, or if you've got a piece of paper there, just to give yourself a moment or two to think through these 2 questions. In what ways is this metaphor helpful? In what ways is this helpful as you think about your experience or experience of those around you? And how is it different to your experience? What is distinctive in regards to your experience as you see, as you hold it up against the picture of the metaphor of bushfire or black summer? So I'll give you about 3 or 4 minutes just to reflect quietly. going to interrupt you in 30 seconds. So my reflection on these two questions is a lot, but for me, it's been helpful because of the intensity has been a helpful picture at times, but also the inconsistent nature of impact, which I mentioned before, the difference, but it's also been difference because a bushfire front is like one time, but whereas COVID or the pandemic effects seem to be unrelenting and unpredictable as well. So that's been a reflection for me. And whatever the level of relevance for this picture of this metaphor, something that I've noticed a lot is just the reality of fatigue amongst leaders. Just notice that a lot. And also that sense of people feeling spiritually displaced. Use the term spiritual refugees there, but a number of people that I've engaged with over the last couple of years, 18 months, 2 years, has been that sense of displacement as well. So there's a couple of things that I've noticed. And so it leads me to the question of, well, how do we process this type of trauma and impact, and then consider what emergence looks like, knowing that that's going to look different for different people. But the idea of emerging out of or through the circumstances of pandemic is a challenging question. And so my question today really is, what might we learn from bushfire recovery? And I simply wanted to present three things briefly: phases, principles, and domains. In fact, I'm going to look at domains first and then principles. So phases, domains, and principles of bushfire recovery. If it's like a bushfire, is there something to learn from disaster recovery? And this information was gleaned from the National Bushfire Recovery Agency's booklet, Journey to Recovery. And I'm glad that I printed it out, but I didn't save the PDF off the website because the Australian government has now changed the agency to National Recovery and Resilience Agency, and I can't find the booklet, but it's the content is still been helpful. So phases, domains, and principles. Firstly, the idea of phases of recovery, referring to the chart here with the three green circles in the middle. That language has been helpful for me, that we respond to a bushfire disaster, and then relief comes, and then recovery is something that we begin to implement as a third phase in that process. And so response being lights and sirens, immediate care, relief being clothing and shelter and food, obviously, and then recovery obviously looks different from that. So that's been a helpful framework for me in thinking through as I look back retrospectively in my circumstances from May to November. So as we met as a small community in Junction, our cafe op shop, we were able to meet as a group of 20 and jump on the live stream, and then there's a sense where that was our response. Around December, there was a sense of relief where we changed from watching the live stream, recognising we're actually people in the same room and we could engage together. And so we did some storytelling. And so that was a sense of relief. Another thing that was a sense of relief for me, I remember, in fact, it was one of these calls early on, and someone asked me, the question was asked, how are you experiencing God during this time? And that was when kind of lockdown was, everyone was experiencing it. And we were able to still drive around the place, and my son was on his L's, on his L plates. And so, experiencing God for me, I jokingly said, was when I was driving with my son, and it had nothing to do with his bad driving. It was just like, that was actually something different. There was an opportunity for me to just be in a different headspace, and so it provided relief. And then recovery. So we're actually in that space now where we're naming what we're doing as a little church since about August. So we don't know what that's going to look like, but I can see there is certainly a shift in how we're approaching things. And so what I wanted to note here is that there's been a hovering on oscillation, if this model is helpful, but there's also been a hovering or oscillation with those three phases. Like I said, a bushfire comes through, the fuel is consumed, and then you know what you're dealing with. Whereas with pandemic, there's been that sense of, we've responded, restrictions lift, there's that sense of relief. Confidence is built and we begin to think about recovery, but if confidence is hit, we descend back into relief, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, it just is what it is. But then restrictions tighten again, or there's an outbreak that happens and we're back in response. So that's a simple way that I've kind of been processing it. And so it's hard to explore recovery when when confidence is hit and we're taken back again. So that's just what I've noted. So I want to give you another time just to reflect, and I'm mindful that there'll be desire to kind of discuss this and thrash it around. I just inviting you just to sit in it, to let it kind of resonate with you, just to correspond, like have a look at how your own experience is corresponding or not with some of these thoughts. And I want to give you another 3 minutes or so just to do that. So the questions I'm bringing you now are: what activities are included in your response and relief efforts? And so that might be for you personally, or it might be your ministry context, or in your team, your organisation. What activities are included in your response and relief efforts? How have you noted? As you look back, what do you see? And then what are you looking for to move from relief to recovery? So what's that? One of the things I really loved about this idea of Hugh Banger being in the bunker, when he heard the diesel engine of the local volunteer fire brigade, he knew it was safe to get out of the bunker, and so that kind of put him in that spot of being able to look towards what recovery looked like. So what's the diesel engine for you? What are you looking for to move from relief to recovery? So our key responses and relief activities have been this. When this happens, I'm imagining we can begin some sort of recovery. So again, be a mistake to necessarily think that looks like exactly what it looked like 18 months ago or 2 years ago. It might be looking different, but what is it that you're looking for to kind of be that indicator to move from relief into recovery? I want to give you just 2 or 3 minutes just to reflect on those questions. interrupt in 30 seconds. So where we've been so far is introduced the picture of bushfire as a metaphor, and bushfire recovery as a metaphor for our experience with pandemic. And then we've introduced simply the phases of recovery, recognising that there's a response and then relief and then recovery. And I guess one of the things that I'll kind of mention is one of the struggles for me has been not valuing that second circle and recognising that from my experience, from my ministry experience, that I'm pushing towards trying to move ahead and innovate and be agile and think ahead, but recognising actually there probably needs to be some relief that needs to happen for me and for the people that are around me, and so my role as a leader really needs to be exploring what the distribution of relief looks like, and my own need for that relief as well. And so I'm just naming that there's and I'm wondering whether it's not just me, whether there's a propensity for us to rush through those three phases. I'd really love to touch on what the actual recovery phase of this recovery process might look like. I want to speak firstly about the domains of recovery. And this is really the framework that's used in order to think through how resources are distributed, how effort is brought into a recovery process. And so there's social, and so there's mental health stuff and interconnectedness relationally in a community. There's built, so things like structures, housing, townships often. There's the built aspect, the economic aspect, so actually kickstarting the economy again once a bushfire's been through, and of course the environment's a part of that as well, where erosion can be a problem, things like that, and the recovery of environment. And so what I found really interesting is I did the figures for looked at the figures for the federal allocation of funding that I think was around 2 billion that was being looked at being distributed at that point in time, and this was the breakdown where 46% went towards social, 39% to economic, built, and environment were a smaller percentage. And there might be all sorts of things that relates to it. Could be that as the economy picks up, then the built's going to take care of itself, or as time passes, the environment begins to replenish itself. There might be all sorts of reasons as to why that is. But I just found that really interesting because I was thinking about, okay, what's social, and what does that represent, if you like, for my context. And for me, I'd say, pastoral care and fellowship obviously will be a big part of the social aspect in my context. For built, it's use of resources, so buildings and rosters and structures that we have to sustain the momentum of what we're participating in. For economic, the way that I've named that, I've called it ministry enterprise slash outreach. So I'd probably say it's more about participation of people in the movement of what we're doing. So investment in that, and also environment, things like people of peace and broader networks. And that's been one of the challenges for me. Like, for example, I love seeing Herman on the screen here, but the days are gone when I could actually sit with him, and so you worry, okay, well, what about those those longer, those broader networks, and that. So I've been wondering, well, maybe that's just part of the environment that will be replenished as we step into recovery process. So that's just been some interesting observations from a domain perspective. The last thing I wanted to share with you before we go out into breakout rooms is the principles around recovery. And so there's a sense where this is the air that we breathe, or this is what we're immersed in for the environment of what recovery looks like. And these are actually pretty standard. These 6 things are pretty standard as you look at any disaster recovery information. You'll often find these 6 principles as part of the environment of the process: understanding the context, recognizing complexity, using community-led approaches, coordinating all activities, communicate effectively, recognize and build capacity. And so as we think about the picture of those principles being pursued and guiding the process of a community that's been affected by a disaster like a bushfire, again, how do we translate that into the context we find ourselves? There's some qualitative suggestions that I've been thinking through on recovery principles. If we're understanding the context, and that means honestly, even if it hurts, like a lot of our the things that we've had a lot of emotional investment in have been uprooted or ceased. And so understanding the context, then honesty is really important for us to be able to approach that. Recognising complexity, one of the things that has been helpful for me, as Mark says, is podcasts or rebuilders. And one of the sessions that he spoke about, he noticed, he acknowledged the difference between complication and complexity. Complication being complicated and detailed, but there's a linear aspect to complication, whereas complexity, different forces are going to affect us in different ways, and something might be completely unpredictable that affects us in like things like supply chains and stuff like that, if you look at the economy and our lifestyles. So complexity, recognising the complexity, using community-led approaches, and for me that's meant the labour of listening. It's been really difficult for me personally in the little church context that I've been looking to, I guess, foster. It's the discipline for me has been really needed to listen as to where the group of people are at and how do I hear from them as we move forward. I've said something about stories before strategy. This is for me, providing when we're coordinating activities, and this is between our little church and our larger church, rather than trying to fix the future by implementing a strategy and making up a strategy which we don't know if it will work or not, just providing spaces for stories to be told, this is what our experience has been, and providing a platform for others to tell stories. And so a coordination of activities between our little thing and the larger thing down the road. We've actually sought to tell stories and listen for one another. Communicating effectively. I've just put a note here. I just feel like we've had a lot of communication, in a broad scale perspective. We're living off the next press conference. There's opportunity for me to be able to communicate in a way that's personal for people, and recognising and building capacity. I'm just simply saying timing is everything there. I've noticed even with one of my sons who has a ministry background and is very gifted, there's a sense that there's some things he's not ready to push into his capacity just yet. And so timing has been really important in me recognising capacity. I tend to be someone who sees capacity in people and longs for them to grow into that and to flourish into that, as recognising in the context of disaster, that the timing for me to cast that vision has been something that I've needed to think through. So that's just some qualitative suggestions that hopefully might translate for you, but it's certainly been helpful for me as I think about these principles. So what we've done is we've introduced a metaphor. We've sought to think about, okay, what are the similarities or differences with that metaphor? We have thought about the phases of recovery, and the journey of that, and again, the similarities and differences. between the metaphor and our own experience. And we've also looked at what some of the aspects of the recovery phase of recovery might look like. We've thought about the domains, and we've thought about the principles. So what I'm inviting you to do is, as we get Steve to just to break us up into breakout rooms, is to think about something that's been helpful for you. So if there's been something that's been helpful for you as we've just reflected through some of these slides and some of these thoughts, it's just to talk about that, something that's been helpful, and maybe even something to action. What's something for me to action? You can talk about what you like, but if there's a sense where you want a starter, something that's been helpful and something for me to action. And we'll come back after 10 minutes, and I'd love to hear from the groups as to what's been percolating. So thanks, Steve.
Never enough time.
Oh, okay.
Good. It was good though.
We had about 30 seconds of just contemplation at the end, so we were right. Let's hear from one another. What was sparking for you? What was resonating, or what questions arose? Was there something that specifically connected, or did it kind of generate some other thinking? Like, what was going on for you guys?
Naim had a really good short story that we spent some time reflecting on.
About the boy.
Mm.
I was in class with Year 9 students when the first lot of restrictions came in, and we were letting in small groups just talking about it, and this boy said, "I feel really hurt." And I was so surprised because boys don't often use a language like that. And so I just dug in a little bit, and he said, "Well, we're not allowed to play sport with our friends. We're not allowed to go and do the things that we do that give us life and give us connection and fun. What we are allowed to do is come to class and do maths." What the, and similarly with, schooling from home, it's none of the fun stuff, the social stuff, the life-giving things. If you're good at school and if school works for you, then great. But for the rest of us, this is just, I thought the word hurt was really helpful, and it's helped me to think about young people not just as angry or frustrated, but actually wounded.
We also talked about the fact that who's to blame. We look for someone to blame, and this is so complex that there isn't one person or one agency that we can actually kind of go, we hold you accountable. And that builds its own level of frustration with people. Rise of conspiracy theorists and all those sorts of things, because we want to know who to blame. And
the polarizing in the oversimplification is really problematic.
Yeah. And I was thinking as our group was talking, like, we struggle with ambiguity and insecurity. What can I be certain of? And COVID is kind of going, well, things you thought you were certain of, actually you can't be certain of them. And so there is this sense of, I don't know what is stable, I don't know what is certain and secure, because everything keeps changing, and I don't know what the future is going to look like, because that keeps changing as well.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. Someone else want to give a reflection on a conversation that you've just been a part of?
I was in that same room. But I'll just add one more thing as well. I think just in reflecting after we got out, I think what was the first one? Understanding context, I think, is incredibly important given the stuff that we talked about. I think the reflecting on the different ways that the last 2 years has impacted on different people and different communities, to have an empathetic contextual understanding of those things is incredibly important. So I hear what you're saying, Trav, about listening to stories, being able to sit with people and actually unpack just the way that it's impacted them. Sometimes for better, most of the time for worse, but to hear those things incredibly important in terms of what's next and what are the next steps.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Mark. I love that empathetic contextual understanding. You should be able to write that into a textbook at some point, I reckon, Mark. That's good.
Sure, you can quote me on that, mate. Just Ryan 2021.
That's great.
You're good with words, aren't you, Mark?
Someone else?
Just along the lines of recovery, it was interesting. I was just reading some stuff during the week, and I think the UNICEF report for Australia or something was talking about early indications of recovery in young people. It was kind of saying starting to see, some signs that young people, are ready to bounce back or are bouncing back a little bit from some of the things. So I hadn't heard anything like that before. To this point, I'd heard of increased mental health and psychological distress and all those, those kind of things. But this was the first sort of, I think the phrase was early indications of recovery, and I think that's interesting, and even then there was within that same report was some sense of some of the positives that young people were reporting from COVID, extra time with family for some was good, and time to slow things down for some, time to kind of revisit direction in life or something, but anyway, so I think it's really, really kind of positive, kind of exciting to sort of to know that that's possibly going on, and I guess we can get into our problem and deficit mindset and actually not even see that maybe there's some recovery going on, and just to open ourselves to it, I guess, just to pay attention that might be happening, and to get behind it and to kind of encourage it and to acknowledge it. I think that's an important part of recovery, is that actually it goes on. It doesn't all have to be intervened. It's going on to be able to participate in it and get in there with it. So, I just found that kind of stuff interesting because I hadn't come across it before to this point, anyway.
So in the UNICEF documentation, Steve, but also like, did you mention like anecdotally as well? Like, have you kind of seen that? Or?
I feel a bit sort of in Brisbane. I feel a bit like, not that people haven't I feel like in Brisbane to some degree it's been more of an annoyance for a lot of people. I don't know how much comparatively, particularly, we could say it's a crisis, or I think that would depend on certain audiences. But I know in a lot of the circles I would move in, I think the idea that it was a crisis might not be so much the sense that it's more of been an inconvenience. So I wouldn't say I've got these strong stories personally of people, who are moving through those kind of stages of crisis. It's more so, I think I'm hearing those stories more, from other states and places.
Yeah. Good. Thanks, Steve.
It's quite interesting because if you look at the, go response, relief, recovery, I was trying to look at that from a youth worker's perspective, working with your young people, because you can look at it generally and think, oh yeah, in our city or whatever at the time, we're in the relief stage or the recovery stage. But I kind of thought any young person could actually they could all be at different stages. You'd have some of them that feel like they're right back in the response, and some are in relief, and some actually feel like they're in recovery, and they could be sliding in and out of those quite quickly. So you'd have to be careful not to just try and lump everybody all in together and try and then do the next thing, or change the way you're doing things and that sort of stuff. And that thing that you had about spending all that money on the social side of things, I think again there's that whole thing about I think Mark mentioned it, that whole thing about listening to the people's stories and that sort of stuff. And there's this phrase going around with a lot of people that I've been talking to with youth ministry, and they're calling it slow down youth ministry, where it's time that we actually, it's not about running all these games and activities and all these things now that you're open again and that sorts of things. It's actually about just being together and taking time to listen to people's stories, and that sort of things. But one of the other things that we kind of focused in on a little bit was the guy's bunker.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we have all this, well, we feel like we've got all this stuff going on, and our security becomes in all these other sorts of things, which, like he had, you know, he had his farm and his house and all those sorts of things. But at the end of the day, his only real secure place was in his bunker. And when you were talking about that, I had this picture of when was the last time he actually went down and checked that his bunker was in a good state.
Yep.
And when was the last time that we actually checked to see that our bunker was in a good state? And you know, Glenn kind of shared some stuff about two things that kind of make up his bunker and things and that sort of stuff. And I think it's, yeah, probably a thing for all of us to think, if that's not actually in a good state, maybe going through these stages and phases and things isn't necessarily going to be very easy if you haven't got a good solid bunker to hide in, I suppose, or whatever, to, yeah, that sort of thing. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, that's good. Can we ask Glenn?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, all I was saying was, like, yeah, my bunker. Like, firstly, well, what are the things that I need to actually be able to get up and fight fires and encounter the world around me? And I was saying that, really, if my relationship with Christ, if I'm not attending to that core relationship first, but then the relationship that sits beside that is my relationship with my wife. You know, if I'm not attending to those two relationships in particular, actually the world very quickly just feels overwhelmed. And I feel like I can't face, like, even the most minor interruption. But if both of those relationships are engaged and, yeah, somewhat healthy, it's almost like there's nothing that can stop me. Yeah, and I mean, they're strong words, but just if they're in check, I can deal with the world. But if those things aren't in check, then very quickly the world becomes overwhelming for me.
Yeah, good. Thanks for sharing that. Good. Thanks, Glenn. We've got a moment or two longer, just something that you either said or something you heard or thought of. It might be really important for the rest of us to hear, if you'd like to share that from your conversation, something you've been musing on through this session.
I'd be quite interested to see where you're kind of, you know, like the sort of stages of grief kind of come into this whole process as well. Because I think that's been a huge thing. I think obviously it's been picked up on when we were talking about young people feeling hurt. But a lot of people are grieving the life they had, grieving things that they've not been able to do, and all of that sort of things. And then all those sort of stages that you go through in that process. Be interesting to see where that kind of intersects into some of this as well, you know, because I think it's, you know, that whole thing of journey, that whole thing of how long is this going to be for, you know, it's and the taking of the time and the patience as people move through those different phases. Yeah, quite interesting.
Yeah, thanks, Andy.
I wrote down, as we kind of look toward recovery, you know, what are the new models of ministry, but also not just kind of what do programs and resources look like or how they're different, but how has this and how does this change the worldview and almost the underpinning theology of people as well? How has that been reshaped? Because that will in turn shape an enormous amount of things. And how do we enable people to begin to identify and tying in with grief, everything has changed. What is it changing to? And that process of moving from disorientation to reorientation, what is the space for the church in there to help people in that process?
Yeah, and it's an interesting tension, Adrian, isn't it? Of even naming, even asking that question, knowing that that's going to be met with a variety of responses as according to where people are at and what their experience is. Really is, yeah, it's an interesting space to be in. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. Looking at, checking things, after the bushfire, after the pandemic, I'm kind of like wondering how we will respond into a new world, or are we just going to revert back into what we were used to, doing things the way, because that's how we thought it would be good. So like, where will be a place of introspection rather than always moving forward? Because in a sense, that's like how we are framing our ministry, especially in the Philippines, and kind of like very competitive youth ministry programs. But instead, how do we like be more really serving not just our church members and our church youth people, but rather serving the community and preparing them, even perhaps moving forward, because perhaps there may be even greater challenges that may come.
Yep. Thanks, Herman. Well, thanks for engaging with the process, giving you opportunity to reflect, but also to discuss and think through what process looks like and how that lands in a variety of contexts. I just wanted to share this thought in finishing my time up here today out of Psalm 40. Where there's this progression in verses 1 and 2 of God kneeling down, of listening to my cry, reaching and drawing me, pulling me out of the hole that David's in, putting me on a warm rock, that sense of holding me steady enough to continue the journey again. And then it says in verse 3, as if that were not enough, because of him my mind is clearing up. And now I have a new song to sing, a song of praise to the one who saved me. Because of what he's done, many people will see and come to trust in the eternal. I'm just mindful of what Glyn had to share in regards to fostering that relationship with God and trusting him in his goodness and all of what that means. I was actually, just reading through the scripture and just a couple of weeks ago and a few weeks ago now, and was sitting in my lounge room and it's a competitive space in my lounge room, whether we're in lockdown or not, like in our house. So our 19-year-old who's recently moved to Melbourne from Adelaide, go figure, but he's done that. And he's the way of him dealing with some of the some of the pressure and anxiety that he's been processing has been to blast Nicki Minaj during his time in the bathroom, and that kind of infiltrates the rest of the household. And so moments of quiet contemplation have been hard to come by, and we're. I need to be careful how I say this, because when he moved out, it did create space for a bit more reflection. And my youngest son, who's 16 now, started singing in the bathroom while I'm trying to read through Psalm 40. And I'm thinking, oh, seriously, I'm just, God, I'm trying to, connect with you. And I wish my son, like, this is my thinking. I didn't say this out loud. I wish he'd just shut up. But I get to verse 3 and it's as if there were not enough. Because of him, my mind is clearing up. Now I have a new song to sing, a song of praise to the one who saved me. And as I was listening to Fred, he's actually singing a worship song really loudly, needed some auto tune, but it was actually something really special, and really felt that God was reminding me that he is in the business of composing. He's in the business of creating. Business probably isn't the right word, but that's his practice, that's his heart. He longs to see us sing a song that reflects who he is. I'm just mindful that as we kind of think through, what recovery looks like, and sometimes our reluctance and resistance to that, and just the reality of languishing, of caution, of fear. I guess what I'd like to land today is just with this thought that the one who's presented in the Hebrew scriptures is one who invites us into newness, even in the midst of really challenging times, and I'm just really grateful that God continues to speak that truth into my life, and my invitation is to I guess I'm inviting you to explore what that means as you step into this next part of your journey as well. So thanks for having me.
Cool. Thank you, Travis. I really appreciate that. That's certainly given us a lot to think about and take away, and I think just individually as well as whatever ministries and other things that we find ourselves involved in, and that sort of stuff. Adrian, this was being videoed. Will people be able to get hold of that video to be able to share with other people, or?
Yeah, Steve, I assume you can put it on the Converge Facebook group. Download it.
Yep, awesome.
That's the plan, yeah. So I'm pretty sure that'll be what we'll be able to do.
Yep.
Cool, awesome. That'd be cool. Great. Just before we wrap up and things, 23rd of November is the next kind of opportunity for everyone to get together on Zoom, where we're going to be looking at update or kind of feedback about the research and stuff that's going on. And that's going up on the Facebook page sort of later on today. So just have a look at that. It'll have the invite and all that sort of stuff will be there about what's going on and things. So I think that'll be a great opportunity to catch up and hear from the guys about the work that they've been doing and what stage they're up to and where things are going. So that'd be really cool. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy days to come and join us. I hope you've enjoyed and got some stuff out of today. So let's pray, and then we can let you get back to all the different things that you're going to, because I know here in New Zealand it's almost 5 o'clock. I don't know what time it is where you are. So let's pray. Father God, I thank you that we've been able to take this time to come together. I thank you that because of technology, no matter where we are in this world, actually, we've been able to come together and enjoy this time together. Lord, I thank you for Travis and the energy that he's put into putting this together. Thank you for his heart and for his desire to help others. Lord, I just pray that as we all go away from this time, that if there's individual stuff that we can take out of that we will delve into that, and that we will use it to take us to wherever it is that you want to take us. But Lord, if there's gems and things in here that we can use to reach out to others in ministry, others in our own ministries, or maybe others in that we know of, that we just have them on our heart or on our mind, that this stuff might be appropriate for them at this particular point in time. Lord, direct us towards those people. Show us how we can take this and how we can use this to bless others. So thank you for our time together. I pray for all the different situations that we all find ourselves in. Some of us are able to move around freely, and others of us are still in positions of lockdown. So Lord, meet each of us in our different situations. May you be our bunker, I suppose, for us to be safe in, and may we always look upon you and know that you're there with us and walking with us as we face the fires that we face each day. We thank you that you love us so much that you did send your son and he did die and rise again just for us. We give this time over to you in Jesus' name. Amen.